I think it's about time that we get started. So hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for day 2 of a 3-day conference on the present state of advanced technologies in the pharmaceutical industry, hosted by Deep Pharma Intelligence. My name is Franco Cortez, Director of Deep Knowledge Group's longevity-focused analytical subsidiary, Aging Analytics Agency. And it's my distinct pleasure to be your host for today's talks and discussions. We're joined today by a number of key thought leaders in the AI and pharma space who have come together to discuss the ways in which artificial intelligence is disrupting the processes of drug development in particular. Leaders collaborate with AI-powered drug discovery firms to bring new expertise and innovation into their internal workflows. Our host for both today and the larger 3-day conference is Deep Pharma Intelligence, a specialized analytical agency producing regular analytical reports on major areas of high potential in the pharmaceutical and healthcare industries, maintaining ratings and benchmarkings of companies based on their innovation potential and business activity in the biotech space, as well as providing strategic consulting services to various top-tier clients, including investment funds and banks, family offices, insurance companies, governmental organizations, and large pharma companies, among others. The company itself is a joint venture between 2 highly specialized UK-based market intelligence hubs in the pharma and biotech space. This 3-day conference also serves as a convenient frame to announce the official launch of 2 new open access special analytical reports produced by Deep Pharma Intelligence, titled Landscape of Advanced Technology Companies in the Pharmaceutical Industry on the one hand, and AI for Drug Discovery, Biomarker Development, and Advanced R&D Landscape Overview Q4 2021 on the other. Both of which are freely available for review and your viewing pleasure at www.deep-pharma.tech. These reports have been designed to provide key industry stakeholders with deep expertise on how their strategic agendas can be optimized in order to leverage novel research, new technologies, and emerging market opportunities, as well as how they can stay competitive in a rapidly changing technological environment, taking into account shifting global priorities and trends. These reports are also complemented by a big data analytics platform where registered users can create their own interactive analytical reports in their respective spheres of activity and interest, analyze companies active in these spheres in a more precise and dynamic manner, etc. And various functionalities include company SWOT analysis, funding distribution, regional statistics, and much more. So day 2 focuses specifically on the current state of artificial intelligence for drug discovery. We will be hearing from a number of invited specialists, professionals, executives, and thought leaders on key opportunities, challenges, and case studies in this space, each of whom will share with us their latest findings, achievements, and insights, followed by a panel discussion, which will bring everybody together to explore in a more dynamic manner the present state and near future of AI for drug discovery. Starting off today's talks, we will be hearing from Martin Emanuel Bittner, Chief Executive Officer of Arcturus, who will be speaking on combining robotics and machine learning for accelerated drug discovery, followed by Dr. Andre Bavailo, Director of Deep Pharma Intelligence, who will be delivering an overview of the current state, trends, and ecosystem of artificial intelligence in drug discovery. Following Andre, we will be hearing from Helen Uvrenko, Head of Analytics for Deep Pharma Intelligence, who will be giving a little bit more insight into the scope and functionality of Deep Pharma Intelligence's big data analytics platform. Following Helen, we will be hearing from Hee-Jung Kyu, Head of the UK office at Standine, followed last but not least by Shane Krause, Director of Strategy for Stratos Labs, on Beyond the Cough, measuring wheeze and other lung sounds in respiratory trials. A reminder for all of our viewers that this is day 2 of a 3-day conference We will be having two sessions tomorrow, one beginning at 10 a.m. BST in the morning, and the other beginning at 5 p.m. BST in the afternoon. And I highly encourage you to join us again for those talks and discussions. Without further ado, I would now like to welcome to the floor our first speaker for today, Martin Emanuel Bittner, once again, Chief Executive Officer of Arcturus, who will be speaking on combining robotics and machine learning for accelerated drug discovery. Martin Emanuel, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. The floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for these very kind words. It's wonderful to be here. So thank you very much again for the invitation. Well, first of all, it's very nice to be here. And it's wonderful kind of that we can gather kind of with such an excellent kind of group of speakers and such a broad range of attendees from so many different parts of the world. So it's kind of one of the good things about kind of being able to run events virtually. At least you can basically attend things from kind of the comfort of your homes, even if it's thousands of miles away. To start my talk and start kind of this session, kind of, I would like to briefly look at kind of one of the biggest challenges we currently see within drug discovery, which is a decline in pharmaceutical R&D productivity. All of us know that drug discovery is very expensive and drug discovery takes a very long time. However, what is even more worrying is that over time, it has become more and more expensive, or in other words, the number of drugs being approved per dollar per research $1 billion spent has been going down for a very long time. That is, of course, something which is a multifaceted issue where there's various components that need to be addressed, from regulatory to, many people say, kind of that easy targets have already been worked upon. So drug discovery inherently has to become kind of more difficult. But there are also some underlying reasons which I think are particularly important to highlight here. And one of them is the quality of research data. Thanks to studies done by Bayer and Amgen, we know that far too much research out there is not reproducible. We know that between 80 and 90% of preclinical oncology studies, when reproduced by third parties, do not show the same results. And that is something that is incredibly worrying, because in the end, drug discovery is something which builds on and has to build on solid, robust, reliable science. And if we can't even rely kind of on the data which is out there, that of course then puts into question many of the research programs underway that are based on exactly these findings. And just one other number is that cell lines, probably one of the most important research tools out there, in 1 in 2 cases are either contaminated or misidentified. So we really deal with an environment where data quality is really not what it's supposed to be and not what it should be. At the same time, if we look at laboratories today, they more or less look the same way they've been looking like for the past 30, 40, 50 years. The laboratory today still looks so very similar to one kind of from the 60s. Of course, there's new devices, of course, kind of there's new types of experiments, but the work mode itself really has not changed in a very long time. And that is in very stark contrast to most other industries where there's been a huge increase in the adoption of technology, from early electronics and computers to robotics to machine-to-machine communication to the cloud. Most other walks of life, most of the industries have been transformed to a way in which they are hardly recognizable. So we're seeing this disconnect between so many other industries and between lab research and drug discovery. And that is something which we believe is going to change, because new technologies are having a bigger and bigger impact on drug discovery. And right now is a very exciting time where these technologies reach kind of a new stage of maturation. Of course, the first one coming to mind, probably kind of the most prominent one, is artificial intelligence. And this is a slide which shows how there's a huge increase in the number of AI-driven drug discovery companies that have been founded over the last 10, 15 years, with that growth being in line with further increases in investment in the space. There's, for example, the excellent Stanford report on investment in AI, which also highlights drug discovery and biomedicine as the shining example for the most impressive increase kind of year over year. So in other words, we're seeing that AI-driven drug discovery or machine learning-driven drug discovery is becoming more and more prevalent. If we do look kind of at the numbers in terms of compound annual growth, we can see this is indeed growing kind of very, very impressively. In this case, some Emergent Insights report that we've quoted here. But what I find kind of very interesting is if we try to put this trend into perspective. And to this end, kind of I've chosen kind of this very simple XY graph, where on the Y-axis, we can see the amount of data mining or AI and use of AI and AI readiness. And the X-axis on the bottom is the degree of automation, where for the longest time, companies have been in this quadrant we can see right here, with traditional biotech companies, traditional pharma companies, and CROs not really using AI much and relying mostly on manual work. Apart from high throughput screening, that's of course an exception, but for the most part, experiments have been done manually. So that has been the status quo for a very, very long time. And we've then seen kind of a first wave of companies, of AI-driven drug discovery companies, such as in silico medicine, Benevolent, Atomwise, and many, many others, companies that have pioneered the use of AI, ML, deep learning, and other methods to, for example, identify novel targets, such as Benevolent, to identify novel targets and do generative chemistry, such as in silico medicine, to do virtual screening, to repurpose drugs. So there have been many different ways in which AI companies have emerged that address very different parts of the entire drug discovery journey. And at the same time, there's been a second trend which has been completely independent, which is the rise of robotics. And so in the robotics space, we've seen synthetic biology companies such as Zymergen and Ginkgo, cloud laboratories such as Strateos and Emerald Cloud Lab, companies where robotics has played a major role in them being able to run more experiments or to remote control experiments in these foundry-like entities. And what we find particularly exciting is now to think about this last quadrant, which is kind of waiting enough to be filled in on the next slide, where we can see the combination of a very high degree of automation with a very heavy emphasis on data science, AI, and machine learning. And the companies we currently see in this quadrant is predominantly Recursion Pharmaceuticals, Incitro, and ourselves, where the basic idea is the same, which is leveraging the power of automation and leveraging the power of robotics to generate large amounts of highly structured, fully annotated, fully contextualized information, which can then be used as a source for decision making. Because in the end, what these companies have in common is the realization that what I showed in the previous slide, that the lack in data quality and the lack in data structure and the lack in data annotation is one of the biggest obstacles for the widespread adoption of AI in drug discovery. If we look at publicly available data sets, we know that about 90 to 95% don't even pass basic quality control. Machine learning algorithms is something where many of the tools are open access anyways, and where more and more algorithms are becoming increasingly well described. So the true edge in a few years' time is going to be not possession of the algorithms, but the underlying data. Because as every machine learning engineer is going to tell you, garbage in, garbage out. With inferior data come inferior models. With superior data come superior models. It's absolutely crucial from a machine learning perspective. It is absolutely central to have the best possible input data. That means data which is robust, which is reproducible, because if it's not reproducible, it's not real. But it also means data that is far more rich and far better contextualized compared to industry standard. And what I mean by that is saying that for the longest time, when we were performing experiments, we were content with just having a microscope image. And we looked at the image and kind of that would be the experiment or the results of the experiment. However, only looking at the microscope image, which comes out of an experiment, is a very incomplete way of thinking about experimentation, because you don't know how the experiment is being conducted. Was the incubation time 3 hours or 6 hours? Has the drug been added at room temperature, or was the drug heated to 37 degrees centigrade? So many pieces of information which are absolutely crucial to be able to compare data, pool data, and mine data, which as of now are completely being disregarded. And that is the reason why we believe kind of the use of automation and the use of very complex sensor arrays allows us to generate data at a scale and with a quality and with a degree of annotation that is unprecedented. So if we summarize it on this slide, we really feel that there is a big number of companies using very, very interesting AI algorithms, but there's only very few that also generate the data in-house that are being used to train these models. And that is something where we see that this combination of robotics and AI is one of these incredibly promising combinations. And why is that the case? So this diagram shows in a very schematic way how the drug discovery journey is evolving right now, where for the longest time, conventional drug discovery has been kind of a zigzag process from hit to candidate in this case, where there's many iterations, where each iteration that we perform may go in a better direction, it may not, where there's lots of false positives and false negatives, and where the entire design, make, test, analyze, the DMTA cycle is entirely driven by humans. And that is something which requires a lot of time, which requires a lot of efforts, and which means that processes can never run as fast as we would like them to. And that is now something we contrast by doing things kind of differently and by looking at what we see as, in this case, our approach to combining robotics and methods of AI, where we can very drastically reduce the number of iterations that are being required, because each iteration is based on a far richer, far more encompassing data set, and where we can make sure that the cycle itself is done increasingly in an automation, robotics, and machine learning driven fashion. So it's very much about replacing processes with a technological counterpart, which allows us to put the human where the human is best at, which is ingenuity, creativity, oversight, and direction, and not the actual performance of lab work. So that is kind of already kind of my presentation kind of for today. And I hope kind of I gave you kind of a bit of a glimpse into how we see the drug discovery ecosystem evolve, what we see as some of the key areas of growth and of interest, including kind of the combination of robotics and AI, and also why we think that this combination is something which over the coming years is going to have tremendous impact on this industry. Because I think what the Recursion Pharmaceutical IPO has shown is that there is an increasing realization how these processes synergize and how robotics and how AI can work together and lead to very exciting new drug discovery programs. So in other words, it is a very exciting field and a very exciting time. And I'm very glad I was here, and I'm looking forward to receiving questions.
Thank you very much, Martin Emanuel. That was very insightful. While today's session is primarily focused on AI, we always seek to explore synergies, and the work that you're doing at the intersection of AI and robotics is no exception. So thank you very much for that. Any of our attendees who have specific questions for Martin Emanuel and Arcturus are encouraged to pop them into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We'll do our very best to address them during the panel discussion and roundtable a little bit later today. So thank you, Martin Emanuel. Next, we'll be hearing from Helen Uvrenko, Head of Analytics at Deep Pharma Intelligence, who will be delivering a more comprehensive overview of the analytical features and capabilities present on Deep Pharma Intelligence's Big Data Analytics dashboard. Helen, a pleasure as always. The floor is yours.
Thank you for introduction, Franco. So I hope everyone enjoys the webinar so far. Once again, my name is Helen Uvrenko. I'm the head of Analytical department at Deep Pharma Intelligence, and I would like to present Big Data Analytics platform by Deep Pharma Intelligence today. So as you may remember from the previous presentations of my colleagues, DPI is the joint venture between the Deep Knowledge Analytics, a subsidiary of Deep Knowledge Group, and the company named Biopharma Trend, which results in DPI focuses on such number of key technological areas as AI for drug discovery and development, promising biotech startups and therapeutic products, emerging therapeutic modalities and technologies and trends in precision medicine like nanotechnology, cell therapies, and gene therapies, etc. Due to the technological expansion in the pharmaceutical market and companies' active growth, these fields are considered utterly attractive for investment activity. Under such conditions, data about companies, their fundings, mergers, acquisitions, collaboration, patents, etc., is getting difficult to track down. This is why we created the Big Data Analytical platform for easier data processing and automated analysis, which is a cloud-based sophisticated engine for advanced market and business intelligence in the pharmaceutical and healthcare industries, which includes data mining, infrastructure for expert data curation, and advanced visualization dashboards like mind maps and knowledge graphs. Speaking of a general overview of the platform, it provides you with such basic entities as companies, investors, and downloadable static DPI reports, which are also always available at our main website. While a company as an entity has such default attributes as contact information, country, patents, total funding, IPO status, general activities in the field, SWOT analysis, and many other. Similar parameters, of course, are available for investor companies. The commercial value of such platform are many things like investment analytics and actionable insights about primary and secondary markets, identification of growth opportunities for companies, including partnerships, technology deals, mergers, acquisitions, investments prospects, data-driven insights about the emerging areas in the medical research and technology, including, of course, pharmaceutical, biotech, and medical devices, and healthcare and tech industries. Another part of this is, of course, the SWOT analysis of most promising entities of companies presented in the reports. And this is a question: who can benefit from such a platform? These are, of course, investment institutions and funds and banks for kind of matchmaking opportunities for them, private and public companies in pharma and biotech space, of course, research institutions, universities, technology vendors, and contract research organizations or CROs, startup hubs and accelerators, and of course, many others who is interested. Well, first part of the platform is interactive analytical report, which contains information about companies presented in the downloadable static version. Interactive report has cross-links and information sources for a deeper research. Furthermore, all presented charts are clickable and was made for user convenience. For example, if sector has 25 companies in section 2 display, you will be able to view all of the companies in the drop-down list, which will allow you to easily view their parameters. Also, there you can find additional information like interviews with the selected technology vendors, scope of AI applications in pharma research and development, and SWOT analysis of relevant technologies and other. So through the platform later, you can get to the interactive mind map system where you can see entitled presentation in the form of mind map. Regarding the AI and drug discovery report, all of them except such parameters are funding, business model, therapeutic focus, research focus, they're all available. Mind maps also show connections between investor companies and their multiple mentees. Every company and category on the mind map can also be seen separately for more thorough studies. If you're peculiarly interested in some concrete company and you'd like to know their position in the market, you'll definitely need to have look on their standard fundings and companies who also keep an eye on them. Our top competitors will allow you to analyze companies, investors, and competitors' investors. So this will give you a ground overview on companies' current state of affairs and see who can be compared to them and why. Comparative analysis section was created to correlate SWOT parameters analysis of several companies using the mathematical algorithms, such characteristics as intellectual property, targets of treatment, product pipeline maturity, collaborations, marketing, and many others are brought to measurable unified parameters. This is an apt illustration of companies' differences, weak spots, and strong suits. Portfolio Constructor is a tool for comparative companies analysis too, which is based on their stocks and daily income, accompanied by portfolio summary and net income. So this is all from me today. I am very thankful for your attention and stay tuned.
Thank you so much for that, Helen. Very comprehensive indeed. And a reminder to all of our viewers that they could learn more about the platform at www.deep-tech.com. Our next speaker for today is Hee-Jung Koo, head of the UK office at Standime. Hee-Jung, a pleasure to have you with us today. The floor is yours.
Thanks for the introduction and thanks for having me here today. So as introduced, I'm Hee-Jung Koo and I'm a Deputy Director of Standime UK. So for those who are not familiar with our company, Standime is an AI drug discovery company headquartered in Seoul, South Korea. And we recently arrived in the UK about 3 months ago, and we just incorporated our UK subsidiary here in Cambridge. So what we are trying to do is to create value by establishing a system that continuously supplies the first-in-class drugs. It means that we're not really concentrating on developing a couple of pipelines to the final stage, but rather we are interested in securing a smart pool of the early stage potential drug candidates. So we have been developing our AI platform for the early drug discovery stages, spanning from novel target identification to novel compound design. And now we are automating this whole procedure in the form of a workflow, starting from our AI platforms and with some mandatory experimental procedure like chemical synthesis or testing the efficacy or toxicity and something like that. And finally, getting some valuable first-in-class compounds. So this part is quite relatively controllable, hopefully fully under the control of ourselves. But this part, including the experimental part like synthesis or assays, may not be fully predictable or controllable. So definitely what we can contribute to the most is to make this part to be more efficient, highly efficient, and systematic. And for this part, we are also trying to minimize the uncertainty of the wet lab procedure by providing a minimal number of, but highly diversified, potentially synthesizable compounds, so that we don't have to synthesize too many compounds, but with more high probability of getting valuable molecules. So on the whole, we're trying to systematize this whole procedure, and we started to establish this workflow from early on this year, and we have confirmed several meaningful structures from the leading project started at first, and now we are doing lead optimization for the structures. So for today, I will give you a brief introduction of this part. So how our AI platforms are doing to identify novel targets and to generate novel compounds for the novel targets. For novel target identification, we basically use a graph database constructed by ourselves, integrating the information from diverse sources. And we apply our AI algorithms on the constructed database, and we can get a list of target candidates with the evidence of the prediction. And then we apply some filters on the target list to secure the competitiveness and novelty of the target. And then finally, our internal experts will review the survived targets. And now we are ready to finalize the target for further development. This is the scheme of our database incorporated in target identification platform. So it contains the information from the literature and also the public databases. It is comprised of the information such as protein-protein interactions, and pathway or biological process information, and patient transcriptome and disease gene associations, and so on. So basically, very wide range of information that is needed to investigate the disease and target associations. And as we can see here, we have mainly these three nodes: diseases, targets, and compounds, and we have many relations connecting these nodes, and also we have some additional information surrounding these nodes to describe these nodes. So for example, symptoms for diseases, or ontologies for targets, or side effects for the compounds. Currently, we have more than 4 million relations connecting about 70,000 nodes. And here we can see how we extract information from the literature. As we separately constructed our NLP system, it receives the unstructured text as input, and first it recognizes some meaningful entities like biological entities such as genes or diseases, or molecular physiological activities, or and some relational words like this. And then it will predict the relations between the recognized entities. And by connecting the pieces of information, we can see how the genes and diseases are connected, how they are associated under the context. So this information will be integrated into this knowledge graph, and it can be also used later to investigate how well it is known about the disease and gene relations. Based on the constructed database, we use diverse features from the database and apply our AI algorithms to prioritize the targets for a query disease. We use the graph topological information and path connecting the disease and target on the graph. I mean, the connectivity between the disease target pairs. So using this information, we can select the important paths. I mean, the paths that significantly contribute to explain the disease and target association. And we can also assign the edge weights on the graph by reflecting intrinsic network structure and also the disease-specific information. Utilizing the diverse features from the database enables us to view this problem with diverse and novel insights. And by aggregating this information, we can get a list of potential target candidates. And the targets are ranked according to the association scores calculated from these algorithms, and they are presented with the evidence of the prediction. Because we are using graph database, we can name the paths, we can find the paths that are used to calculate the association scores, and the paths can work as the evidence of the prediction. And here we apply some filters to narrow down the number of the targets. And here we firstly consider the competitiveness of the target. It means that it is also related to the novelty of the target. So how many drugs are being developed with the target and how far they are progressed. So applying these filters, we can filter out the target with low competitiveness. And for the final expert review, we provide the supporting evidence from these algorithms, and we also provide some additional helpful information according to the disease area. So these are some examples of the information that we use to select the target in terms of the oncology pipelines. So this is prognosis data related to the target, and this is the cancer dependency data that we can obtain from themmet.org. After deciding which target to develop further, we can use the next platform to design the novel compound for the target. So here we again constructed a database containing the information regarding the targets and chemicals and novel scaffold. And to roughly go through the whole procedure, we first find the active hit molecules among the commercially available chemical compounds. So our platform is equipped with two different approaches according to the target structure availability. When the target structure is available, we use kind of rescoring module based on the docking simulation. So we generate the various docking poses, and we can get the predicted energy values for each pose. And then we further decompose the energy values to train our model. And when there's no available target structure, then we use a recommender system using the exemplar experimental data. It means that we collect compounds with lots of binding information with diverse targets, and we regard the compounds as kind of evaluation committee, and we let them evaluate how a new compound would bind to a certain target. And after finding the active hits, we change the structure of the hit molecule to secure the patentability with maintaining the overall structure. And then we optimize the novel compound by enumerating the substructures. To secure the novelty, we can explore the chemical space. So this is basically a very high dimensional latent space, conceptualizing diverse molecular properties with the structure. So a chemical compound can be encoded into a point vector in the space, and then it can be decoded back to recover its original structure. So by understanding this property, we can explore the space to find a novel structure around the seed molecule, and then we can find some compounds with novel structure, but still maintaining the original activity of the hit molecule. And also we can use our novel scaffold database, so containing the information of the scaffold and the frequency. I mean, how often the scaffold is used to comprise the existing molecules. So we know the hit compound and we know the overall shape, and we can try diverse building blocks in the position of a certain scaffold. And then finally, we can select the structure with the scaffold of low frequency, and the resulting compound will show the similar activity with the hit compound because the overall shape is similar, but it will have higher patentability because of the novel scaffold. And for the optimization, we built an enumeration model, maintaining the core structure, but optimizing the substructure. So it works like a language model. So suppose that we know a context of a sentence, and if there's a blank in the middle of the sentence, the model will try to find some suitable words for the blank. And in the same context, if we know the context of the whole structure, and if there's a blank in the structure, then this model can suggest some suitable substructure for the blank. So in this way, we can enumerate the structure, and finally, we can select the small molecules with desirable properties. So just as a quick reminder, we have been developing these modules and algorithms to systematize this whole process. And we're now running our own 17 pipelines through this workflow. I couldn't go through into specific example today, but what I want to say is that our workflow is currently going on and is being developed to improve, to shorten the time period for one iteration, and also to get the higher accuracy. So yes, that's all I prepared for today. So thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to take questions, maybe later. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Young. Very, very insightful and interesting indeed. So it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Shane Krause, Director of Strategy for Stratos Labs, who will be speaking on the topic of Beyond the Cough, measuring wheeze and other lung sounds in respiratory trials. Shane, fantastic to have you with us today. The floor is yours.
All right, wonderful. Well, I'm going to get my presentation moving here, and we'll get started. So I definitely appreciate everyone. So my name is Shane Krause. I'm the Director of Strategy for Stratos Labs. Today, we're going to talk about Beyond the Cough, measuring wheeze and other lung sounds in respiratory trials. So have you ever watched a movie trailer or read a blurb on the back of a book and had a clear understanding of the full story and characters and twists and turns? Most likely no. You're only really getting small clips into the story, and if it is interesting enough to watch the movie or read the whole story, it's kind of familiar to me, and I hope everyone out there. Have you ever watched a movie or trailer or read a blurb or a book and just scrolling on Netflix and nothing really excited you, but you kind of read the book or just decided to push play on the Netflix movie anyhow? And it was just an incredible movie. The author and the filmmaker really just missed including the right setting and plot and conflict to get you interested in watching the whole movie or reading the whole book. Opened up your understanding of the story with character, structure, point of view that you did not know existed from a blurb or a trailer. And you may be thinking, why on earth am I talking about movies and books during a pharmaceutical technology conference? Currently, respiratory clinical trials have a large similarity to movie trailers and book blurbs. You're really only getting a small snippet of lung sounds at a very specific point in time. Will you hear that respiratory biomarker that is your trial endpoint while that patient is actually inside of the clinical trial site? Maybe, maybe not. Will the subjective data that you're receiving from the participants' journals or diaries develop into a great data set that will serve as a solid measurement for your trial endpoint? Maybe, but traditionally, mostly not. As 49% of patients underreport respiratory symptoms. Conducting respiratory trials is a lot like Steven Spielberg directing a blockbuster movie. You're conducting the most costly trials to run according to HHS at nearly $115 million across all phases. And as you all may know this, the time and cost associated with these trials means that drug discovery and development are more difficult to bring to market and to get patients who desperately need them. And a major factor to the cost here is the collection of information from the patients about their reports of signs and symptoms like wheezing, coughing, shortness of breath, and then other adventitious breath sounds. That is where technology really comes into play, creating a more efficient collection of data and a greater gain of insight into the actual trial endpoints. Without the introduction of technology, it will be rather difficult to move the needle and reduce that consistent high trial cost. And as we add technology to clinical trials, new areas of improvement are identified, while other areas of emphasis need definite attention. From an improvement standpoint, we're talking about patient compliance. At Stratos, we have a 99.59% on patient compliance with our devices inside of all of our clinical trials combined. The ability to make improvements on data collection, data availability, having that data turnaround time at extremely high so you can make different items on those drugs. And then on the attention side, being able to have the attention brought around the burden on the patient. From a clinical trial standpoint, our device has a 100% compliant on patients utilizing our device. And then looking at a burden on the team, adding technology, but also adding that burden on the team, being able to reduce that, making sure that you're not actually adding any burden on your trial team by adding the actual technology. And when we talk about biomarkers as a proxy of an endpoint, we're in our current state are still relying very heavily on subjective paper-based or digital journals to quantify respiratory symptoms. These journals are subject to variability based on patients' level of education and their perception of the condition. While close clinical and research observations can help reduce that variability and subjectivity, it is also very resource and time intensive. Having a nurse in a clinical trial site watch a participant for 24/7 for symptoms is just not really feasible. So how do you obtain more clinically accurate symptoms? Record those in a low-cost, scalable, real-world setting to improve respiratory trial success. We created it. We created RESP, a solution that's patient-friendly and really addressing the key challenges in respiratory clinical trials. The Stratos Respiratory Management Solution, which brings real innovation at the intersection of lung biomarkers, patient centricity, and machine learning. The industry of life sciences can largely benefit from the enhancement of our pulmonary care monitoring capabilities provided by Stratos Labs to gain insight into patient drug response by analysis of longitudinal lung acoustics. Our solution to help clinical trials is based around three fundamentals. Number one is predictability. We have a lung sound AI engine that with 99% sensitivity and 93% specificity of detecting coughing from a patient in real time. We have lung sound algorithms for other events like wheeze and coughs that are approaching 95% accuracy. And that is also where the patients are. They're in their home. And that's the exciting part of this solution. And so objective data. So now finally we have objective measurement where we can get from a clinical trial site and to their home a solution that can also be completely decentralized. I have one here, which I'll show you here at the end of the presentation. It's a simple device, which you'll see. You'll be able to simply press start button, and then we do the rest. So you can configure it, connect, and collect. We do all the hard work of identifying changes in lung sounds, where patients are, getting the information back to your research team, and so that they can take action. We've had over 200 patients use our system. We've collected over 8,000 hours of lung sounds and over 1 million data points to date. Lastly, the best part of our technology is it can be scaled across research centers, reduce variability in reports, and develop entirely new insights about respiratory status in connection with the devices and drugs. If we talk about a complete game changer, it's increasing our data collection capacity to heights that we have yet to see, with the exception of our device. Being able to identify what is the patient in privacy and security. Is it HIPAA compliant? Are you going to have a encryption from the data standpoint at rest? Are you going to have it in transit? Are you having a partner that has the ability to have noise cancellation and to create that patient privacy? Are you able to collect that data real time? Not only that, but can you collect it real time and then also have a huge library of lung sounds to be able to look at post analysis? And not only that, but is it going to be easy for the patient? Are you going to have a high patient compliance? So all of those options are what's really game changing for the introduction of Stratus Rest into clinical trials. And not only that, but kind of what the whole presence of this presentation is about is looking beyond the cough. There is a lot of clinical trials that are cough as its primary endpoint. Whereas with REST, you can optimize your clinical trials to better capture lung sound biomarkers outside of cough. REST allows for those clinical endpoints for cough, along with other adventitious breath sounds, to be captured and show positive results. Because the current alternatives to REST is really only counting coughs, while our proprietary technology requires stethoscope quality sounds like wheezing, cough spasms, rhonchi, whistles, shortness of breath, other adventitious lung events, including chest wall movement, which would require, without requiring really any episodic patient intervention. And our passive and longitudinal bioacoustics insights allow us to build a more complete picture of the patient's respiratory status. When we talk about how do we get the data, where does it go, how does it flow? So from a patient perspective, as you can see there on the slide, the device is then Bluetooth transmitted through to a cellular device and then to the actual Stratus cloud, where then all information is encrypted. You can see here whether it's being transmitted into our AI engine and allowed for data retrieval and then to our sponsored data science. But let's kind of move a little bit more into the full somatic experience, if you may, to respiratory trials and why respiratory biomarkers can play an important impact as an endpoint. We're going to look at one of our studies published in the American Thoracic Society. Our study suggests that continuous auscultation may be superior to intermittent auscultation in determining the presence of wheezes in patients presenting with asthma or COPD exacerbation. Clinical validation is top of mind for most clinical trials. This study allows for the technology solution to be compared with the standard of care, the Littman 3200 stethoscope, and also clinical outcomes. 2 board-certified physicians listened to the Littman 3200 and REST recordings. This study has similarities of traditional centralized trial, where participants received episodic auscultation versus the benefit of adding technology to give a greater understanding of pulmonary event changes in the participant. As with clinical trials, the collection of lung sounds continues to be limited by the need to have a clinician auscultate a patient directly. This limitation is both geographical and temporal. The geographical limitation is obvious, right? The patient must be in the presence of a clinician for the collection of lung sounds. The temporal limitation is perhaps more frustrating across the globe, is the variety of coughs, wheeze, rales, rhonchi that may lead to over or under treatment of patients, while providing endless frustration to junior clinicians who report lung findings that are subsequently really unverified by a senior physician. And so you also have that inner observation variability and use of different terms. As we look at the data recorded and captured in the study, what was significant was the fact that recordings identified more patients with wheezes than intermittent recordings. We noted that 4 patients were detected only in part of the rest recordings beyond the initial and final segments, and were not detected by the intermediate recordings required through the Littman 3200. This demonstrates that the current standard of care, intermittent auscultation, your episodic auscultation, which is currently happening in your traditional clinical trials, may miss the pulmonary exam findings that could impact a patient's disposition. In contrast, though, RESP detected lung sound changes in these 4 patients that provided information reflective on the underlying disease process that were not otherwise available with the standard of care auscultation. We observed that 8 patients who had more wheezes per minute after treatment in ED. 4 of those patients, the wheeze rate increased 3-fold after treatment. Yet all these 4 patients had an increase in PDF after treatment, and all 4 patients were still discharged home. And as the RESP motion sensors clearly detected chest wall motion consistent with breathing, these patients were really not moving air prior to treatment, which really is illustrated to us that the motion sensor data provides a powerful additional information on the respiratory status and potential treatment outcomes. In closing, rather than small snapshots that are currently happening at clinical sites, you get continuous longitudinal data, AKA the full movie production, if you may, for post-processing and analysis that happened in a remote real-world setting with the Stratos Labs device. So today, Stratos Labs has a unique opportunity to stand as a leader in the respiratory health. Our clinically validated bioacoustic library of sounds and our AI engine is the world's largest entirely hands-free clinical grade data set, enabling Stratos Labs to be the standard bearer of acoustic digital biomarkers for clinical research and really respiratory care globally. I would like to thank you all for this session, Beyond the Cough, Measuring Wheeze and Other Sound in Clinical Trials. You may feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any interest in learning more about Stratos Labs and our clinical trial solution. And I'm going to show you just a brief view. You're welcome to also connect with me via LinkedIn if you choose that route also. I would like you to follow Stratos Labs on LinkedIn and other social media channels. And then I'll give you a quick glimpse into our post-analysis portal where you can take a glimpse. There won't be any sound, but you'll actually be able to see a little bit of our events here. So with our clinical trial, it's going to see here, you'll be able to see this validated as it rolls through. And in our AI engine, it is identifying these items as single coughs. And so this is what your ending analysis would be with Stratos Labs. And that concludes my time here today.
Thank you so much for that, Shane. Very Insightful indeed. I would now like to welcome to the floor our next speaker, Dr. Andre Bavailo, Director of Deep Pharma Intelligence, who will be providing an overview of the current state as well as trends of the AI and drug discovery ecosystem. Andre, a pleasure to have you once again. As always, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Franco, for the introduction. So today I'd like to be sharing some insights, a very high profile overview from our recent report that we just announced. This is the AI for drug discovery, biomarker development, and advanced R&D landscape overview. This is the regular report that we're producing, but with this installment, we kind of summarized the trends and the information for this quite busy year 2021. And so first of all, speaking about the applications of artificial intelligence in drug discovery, it's a hot trend and it's a really transformative thing that is going on right now. And as we all know, the performance of the pharmaceutical industry as it is right now is not super great in terms of the number of compounds getting to actual clinical and studies and then to market. A lot of failure is due to the fundamental unpredictability of the scientific of the science behind biological systems. And since we don't know many things about biology, it is not possible to do something in a guaranteed way. However, things like automation, standardization of preclinical experiments, modeling of biology, and stuff like that, they open more and more opportunities to know a little bit more about biology and to be able to predict a little bit more precise things. And so artificial intelligence starts playing the critical role in this shift from so-called craftsman approach to drug discovery, where essentially we trial and error method, to more and more industrialized kind of approach, where we have, like the previous presenter noted, the industrialized kind of preclinical experimentation, data generation, and everything is made at scale, and we can apply advanced computational systems to actually make sense of that big data that is generated across various stages of the pharmaceutical research. So currently AI is applied with various degree of success, but it is applied pretty much at every stage. As you see on this kind of tree of the process, it's applied from anywhere from chemical synthesis and fine materials, big data mining and building ontology, biotech research, target identification and validation, all the way to hit discovery, lead discovery, preclinical development, biomarker discovery, and even helping optimize the clinical experiment itself. So, and then AI systems are used by some companies for things like pharmacovigilance, which is basically trying to understand how the drug performs after it has been on the market for some time. And then the drug repurposing is also a very fruitful area for the application of advanced systems, as we will talk a little later. And last but not least, a lot of operational tasks are now being kind of improved by using smart systems based on machine learning, on predictive analytics. For example, like lab automation, virtual lab assistants, smart systems for recording data and making sense of data in real time, etc. So the landscape is quite diverse. The rise of artificial intelligence as the technology has been, not the linear growth, but it was, quite a story. actually, with the quite old concept which emerged in the middle of the last century. A lot of innovation has been done in early theory of AI algorithms, or how machines should work like. But at that time, the lack of computational power, the lack of infrastructure for data management, and actually the lack of that data itself, it didn't allow for this technology to actually develop until up to a point when it is commercially viable and practically feasible. And this progress, things changed substantially at the beginning of this century, and specifically at the beginning of the decade, the last decade, where a lot of innovation in deep learning happened, and a lot of big data was accumulated, not only in mainstream industries like internet, but also in the biopharmaceutical space, because technologies like high throughput screening emerged, and a lot of new information basically flooded into the hands of scientists. So since 2012, primarily, there's been a real growth in the deep learning with new architectures of neural networks. For example, the generative adversarial networks emerged, different approaches, new philosophies for training models, like, for example, reinforcement learning, attention algorithms, latest developments, transformer networks, etc. So many companies have pioneered the application of these kind of technologies in the life sciences and for drug design specifically. Here, just a couple of examples, but I will talk about them in more detail. So let's see some success stories. Basically, in the area of AI, there is a lot of hype. But now the industry starts playing up to the hype, because over the last couple of years, we have seen real major advances by the companies who managed to create new drug candidates from scratch, basically starting from the very basic information like literature, scientific literature, patents, databases on the one hand, and let's say omics databases on the other hand. And by combining that data, making sense of that data, they created models of diseases. They managed to identify successful targets, and ultimately de novo design new drugs. And for example, one quite notable example is in silica medicine. They basically developed the artificial intelligence systems with the end-to-end architecture. So they start with the very target discovery, then they can generate chemistry for that targets, and then even they can assist some clinical trial work in that sense. And so what they did, they managed to discover the pan-fibrotic target for a very serious indication like fibrosis. And then for that novel target, which they discovered, they managed to identify the drug candidate just within 18 months from the start, which is quite impressive compared to traditional drug discovery, which may take years and years at this point. And then just 6 months later, they discovered another hit and advanced it to the drug candidate stage for the kidney fibrosis, a related but still a new indication in this fibrosis field. Another example is, of course, the very well-known, very highly publicized achievement by Deepmind, which managed to apply their deep learning system AlphaFold. It's not just deep learning, by the way, it's a combination of algorithms, but nonetheless, this AI system managed to learn predicting the protein's 3D shape from the sequence of amino acids, the primary structure. And this is the kind of a game changer for the computational biology. A UK-based Exscientia basically advanced several candidates to preclinical stage and even clinical trials. For example, they recently announced the first AI designed molecule for immuno-oncology. Then last year, Benevolent managed to repurpose successfully the drug baricitinib, which was originally the known drug for rheumatoid arthritis. And then they used their knowledge graph kind of AI system to rapidly repurpose this drug against COVID-19 for severe cases. And the drug was later authorized by FDA in partnership with, like the Benevolent actually partnered with Eli Lilly, and then the drug was authorized by the FDA for the treatment of COVID-19 for certain cases. And other successes, AI therapeutics, which also advanced very rapidly their molecule LMA inhibitor for interleukin, as far as I remember. So these companies did this kind of stuff really within months and even days at some points, using this completely new approach for drug discovery. Earlier successes were attributed to Deep Genomics, which used their platform to develop a novel target for Wilson disease, a rare and serious disease, and then discover and develop oligonucleotide candidates for that disease, and that they are kind of processing that to prepare for clinical evaluation. And in 2018, there was Hilks, which also applied their system, end-to-end system, to kind of rapidly design the drug candidates. So what I mean by this is that these AI-first companies, a new wave of companies, they kind of start doing drug discovery in a pretty much conveyor manner at this point. And this is a major validation for this technology, and the major sign that we are probably going to see the change of how the pharmaceutical industry does drug design. Another really major example comes from Moderna, and this is from the vaccine development space. But in this case, I would say that the company has developed the whole digital biotech approach, and they embraced this approach from early days when they basically learned to digitize everything they could possibly do. And there is even a very nice white paper, Digital Biotech is a mission critical to Moderna. You can access the paper and read quite an interesting insight about how they do it and for what cases. But essentially, they managed to create the whole infrastructure for data collection, automation, and ultimately the use of artificial intelligence to process the data and guide processes towards research efficiency and operational efficiency. They managed to apply that paradigm to quickly create mRNA vaccine for COVID-19 back in 2020. Here, just a couple of diagrams where they kind of show what kind of processes were digitized and how they interrelate. What is interesting, then they even automated such tedious topics as filing of paperwork for candidate advancement, etc. Speaking about the ecosystem of AI-first drug discovery companies, we have profiled several hundred of those. Of course, there are many more of them exist, but we kind of focused in our reports only on the leading companies and probably the most publicized companies as well. So we have found kind of groups of companies which across their therapeutic pipeline, like companies who apply AI to just basic biology or some preclinical stuff, companies who run preclinical candidates and have their own pipelines, and then the companies who manage to advance some or all of their candidates to clinical stage. And then we identify that the companies, we have a gradient across the kind of the breadth of the application scale that they are applying their AI systems. Some companies did manage to create full-scale platforms for end-to-end drug discovery. And so they kind of managed to process any kind of data from the very beginning, from ontology, building disease model, all the way to preclinical optimization work, and even clinical research. Speaking about the companies, we have seen the rise in the number of new AI-first biotechs in 2016, 2017, 18. Then now we see kind of much smaller amount of those for various reasons, but still we have new companies founded in 2021. For example, Solaris Therapeutics. This is the AI-driven protein degraders design company, very nice company. And then Non-Exomics, which also apply advanced machine learning analytical tools for discovering non-exomic targets for rare diseases. Then, for example, Perspex Biotech, which is the AI, which are building the full-scale AI based platform, research platform for the discovering multifunctional antibodies and biotherapeutics. So we have new arrivals in this space. Speaking about the number of collaborations between such emerging companies and established big pharma players, we have seen a growth. And in 2021, we have seen more collaborations than even in previous year, and still, I guess we can expect some more coming in November, December. Some major collaborations include C4X Discovery with Sanofi, who basically work on a licensing agreement for interleukin 17A inhibitor program. Cytoreason with Merck KGaA, where cytoreason basically helps them model biology to understand the mechanisms of how the drugs work. And then ICTAS Pfizer being another example where ICTAS basically help Pfizer develop drugs using their de novo design platform, etc. We have profiled a lot of collaborations like that. And of course, it shows that big pharma is kind of interested in this new technology. They are probing the grounds. They have pilots, a lot of pilot projects with these external partners. And the range of those kind of projects is really wide, from very early biology research all the way to clinical work. And after clinical, even for the operational pharmacovigilance, etc. Finally, speaking about venture capital funding dynamics, we have seen rapid growth in the funds available for startups through venture companies, and also a lot of IPOs is taking place in this space. Some of them are going on stock markets through SPAC, SPAC companies, and so. And quite an interesting observation, in my opinion, is that although still a lot of AI-driven startups are primarily in the small molecule drug design space, and this is historically like that. And of course, the chemistry is more straightforward, more data is available for modeling, etc. But still, biologics is keeping up the pace of progress, and we are seeing more and more biologics-focused companies building the AI systems and developing things like antibodies, etc. And right now, we already see up to 20% of the companies in this ecosystem focusing on biologics discovery. For example, Antiverse, just the company that just yesterday they presented the platform for the antibody discovery, was quite an interesting talk. So make sure to check it if you haven't seen it. So of course, we cannot observe artificial intelligence in vacuum, so to speak. Artificial intelligence is just one technology, although a very generalizable technology, but just one technology in a stack of many other supplementary or enabling technologies, which altogether change the way the pharmaceutical industry is operating. Very good talk from Arcturus today. You just heard it. Indeed, they stressed out that the automation, for example, lab automation, robotization of research is really crucial for being able to gather enough data of enough quality to do artificial intelligence modeling. So those kind of things, they depend on each other. And I would also mention the big data providers, such as companies that manage to somehow generate data from various sources. For example, consumer genomic testing companies, 23andMe, they kind of gather data for a completely different application, but then they can kind of license data for research purposes as well. Other kinds of companies, they develop infrastructure and tools to collect data on hospitals, electronic health record management companies. I mean, all those kind of companies, they can become strategic partners for pharma to provide data for training global machine learning models, for completely changing the way the researchers can mine insights about biology and patients. We have profiled quite a lot of companies in this technological landscape, and I was talking about this yesterday, so please make sure to check this this presentation and this report. But anyway, some takeaways here, that artificial intelligence is certainly the driving force of the technological transformation, and absolutely sure that without it, big data would not be of very high, great use to us, because only with advanced analytical systems we can actually make sense of the big data and actually derive some insight. So the other trend is the increasing reliance of the pharmaceutical industry on the technology partners, and technology partners, they now becoming, strategic partners to pharma, because pharmaceutical research cannot be done any longer without the close collaboration and close dependence of these technology providers. Even, for example, even cloud computations or something like that, it becomes kind of the part of pharma and not just a service, just nice to have anymore. I should mention, I talked about this yesterday, but still just repeat myself, that big tech corporations like Google, Tencent, Baidu, etc., they are kind of rapidly entering this space, and they not only bring the resources and technological solutions to pharma, but they also start competing with pharma themselves, creating life science projects, investing in biotech companies, or creating some laboratories, etc. This is a major trend. And finally, last but not least, technology enables new business models of collaboration, like this automated, like remote labs, for example, like being able to run experiments using remote robotized labs and collect data in high volumes, high quality. This is kind of new trend, and I believe it will be really growing rapidly over the couple of years. And of course, it is mandatory to become tech savvy right now. I mean, science is no more just wet lab practice. It's now a combination of biology and technology, and this is where opportunities are presented them. Of course, talent management is a major bottleneck because talent is now scarce, and a lot of training has to be arranged. A lot of university programs now emerge in AI in drug discovery, for example, AI in healthcare, etc. And we need to see a generation of new business leaders who can manage this kind of projects. And collaboration is the must. This is the mantra of today's pharma. The collaboration with everybody, community management, this is the top priority. So I have provided just a very, general and very shallow insights from a really deep study that we did on the landscape of advanced technologies in the pharmaceutical industry, as well as AI for drug discovery and biomarker development. This is more laser-focused report on the AI stuff, whereas the landscape of advanced technology, the very general report, which profiles many different technologies and the tech stack, how they collaborate, etc. Please make sure to check the reports. We have many other reports in many areas of the emerging market. Please check them in the on our website. And of course, our research is backed by the data, and we not only work with data by hand, so to speak, but we also built a sophisticated big data analytics system for market research, for industry research, and for investment analytics. So please make sure to check the platform or reach out to us to find out more. We are open for strategic collaborations and joint analytics report production or media projects. So please reach out to us or ask us some questions, and follow our company and myself, Biotech Oracle, on Twitter. With that, I'd like to conclude this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrei. Insightful as always. And yes, I highly encourage our viewers today to check out both of those open access special analytical case studies. So thank you, Andrei. I'd now like to welcome all of our speakers for today to turn on their videos and join us for a panel discussion, roundtable, in which we will be delving into some of the key topics of today in a deeper and more dynamic manner. So I suppose I will start with a question that is open to all of our panelists. It's very clear that there's a growing number of companies that are building remote lab capabilities for remote experimentation and data generation, etc. During this 3-day conference. Thus far, we've heard talks from a few of these companies active in the ecosystem. I'm wondering to what extent the panel today thinks that this growing trend of remote experimentation will continue, and to what extent it'll shape the industry more generally. Do you think that this is sort of a useful alternative approach, or do you think, such as through CROs, for example, or do you think that this will become the industry standard moving forward?
Okay, I can take this one, colleagues. So basically, we heard actually the answer today already in the first presentation by Arcturus, and indeed, there is a wave of companies who do this robotization stuff and who try to bring the remote labs paradigm to life. And it's not 1, 2, 3, it's dozens of companies like that. And in my opinion, this is the absolutely no way it will not be the key trend, let's say in 2, 3 years from now. Why? Because we are now moving into the AI first, data first drug discovery, so to speak. So, and even big pharma is transforming many processes right now. And I don't know any single large biotech or pharmaceutical company who are not exploring ways to apply machine learning or stuff like that in their processes. And of course, all that is only viable if they can get data for modeling, if they can have the data infrastructures or ways to basically fill the models with fresh data and validated data, annotated data. And that's why it's natural that the more AI will be kind of, growing as a trend, the more all the rest of these kind of enabling technologies will be growing. And by the way, it's not just one example. Another enable technology, so let's say quantum computing, which is extremely early days, but still it's already on the horizon. And so in my opinion, is with everything, this is going to be a very kind of iterative approach, iterative way. I mean, let's say automotive industry has not emerged in 1 year, right? It took several decades for the infrastructure, for the processes to mature. And the same thing will probably happen in the pharma industry. I mean, by 2030, we will have everything transformed in this way. But next year, probably not. But like it's a process of the evolution.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting and good point that this is part of a larger trend of automation across various different technology verticals and horizontals, and part of a growing trend of digital transformation more generally. Andre, you mentioned data, noting that it's a reciprocal process. Models are only as good as the data we could feed them. Obviously, we're seeing a parallel explosion in the capabilities and availability of AI technologies, and the volume of data available. I'm wondering if any of you have particular thoughts or insights on challenges and bottlenecks on the data side. What sorts of data categories, for example, don't seem to be enough quite yet, and how might that change in the coming years?
So yeah, to speak about the data, yeah, definitely. And for Sandine, we are always eager to get a significant amount of high quality data. So especially the omics data will be a representative example of the data that can be used for the AI applications in this area. So and from my experiences, especially for a drug target identification, so and we're already applying patient transcriptome data on our target ID platform to understand the disease biology and to extract some meaningful information from the vast field of the numerics. But yes, the available data is really limited, and especially for the transcriptome data, we have to consider the context of the data generation. So I mean, under which biological condition the data was generated, and also the genomic data is undoubtedly invaluable to understand the disease biology. And I could see that in the UK we have really good sources of this kind of data. So we can get the data from Genomics England or UK Biobank one. So encouraging this kind of the data accumulation, or some projects like DDD or something like that can be a good part. That's a good point to concentrate to solve the data problem. And I also would like to mention the Melody Consortium. So they are pursuing federated learning. So yeah, I think that's a very brilliant approach to solve the kind of data shortage problem.
Well said. Shane, do you have any particular thoughts with regards to data bottlenecks or where things are heading from your own perspective, from predictive systems as opposed to, for example, novel target or molecule discovery, etc.?
I mean, specifically for us in the respiratory clinical trial space, it's moving from the subjective data like I mentioned, to objective data. In the clinical trial space, specifically in respiratory trials, it's very, like I mentioned in my presentation, very subjective in terms of patients' diaries, patients' own reporting, and moving to that more into the objective data, and not only just, did you cough today, or how do you feel today, but actually having the data to back that up, and then utilizing technology to get that objective data, but not only have that, but have that for post-analysis. So you can set those digital biomarkers along with what it's looking like on the drug side from drug interactions and drug treatments, and be able to utilize all of that data to improve to approve and create faster drug enhancements. And the only way that this is going to be accomplished is through some sort of machine learning, some sort of AI engine, which allows for efficiencies to help in those areas. And as I mentioned in clinical trials, specifically in respiratory, as the one graph that I showed, it's time and data collection are what's causing the massive cost that is associated with that. And that's where you're going to have your machine learning. That's where that's really going to be able to create efficiencies in both those and ultimately reduce costs for those trials to where they're not the kind of the top of the mountain.
Well said. Well said. And on the topic of clinical trials, etc., we were discussing on our panel yesterday some forecasts on how clinical trials are moving towards a more personalized shape, as it were. It seems like an interesting dual optima, right? Because you'd think personalization implies a little bit of subjectivity, etc. How exactly to wrangle, the need for objective data, especially within this milieu, against sort of the parallel trend of increasing clinical trial personalization to specific population groups, etc. Do you have any thoughts on the let's say the broader future of clinical trials at the intersection of personalization and objectivity, as you said?
I think the intersection is going to come in two ways. It's going to come in the introduction of specific technologies, whether it's RESP, Stratus Labs, or another different technology. I think that's going to be a primary way for that to happen. But also you have organizations who are, because of their ability to have data, they can create these subsets of patients that are going, or participants, if you may, that are going to be better fit for specific trials. And then alongside, you're going to run that is that those, when you get more on the patient centricity side, because you have this massive data set, or have the ability to attract a massive data set, and everything's getting closer and more to real time, you have the ability to create more personalizations with also these organizations that are these SaaS platforms that can substrate in any group of patients, and then also assist these CROs, assist these farm partners, these sponsors, with conducting not only traditional trials, hybrid trials, and decentralized trials. So I think that's kind of you're hitting with the advancement of technology, and I include software in that also, and then also due to the pandemic has opened up everyone's eyes that even from a remote work standpoint, right? So maybe in 2019 we'd all be in a big conference room together. But everyone's realized that's not necessarily the case. And if you look at any big reports right now that are being posted, decentralized trials is an overwhelming target for most CROs and pharmaceutical sponsors. So I think it's a combination of a lot of those areas, but your data sets and your software and all the assisting that's going to happen there to make all of those endpoints connect is where they're all decentralized.
Indeed, indeed, and it's pretty clear that both AI and population specific data will be required to optimize those dual optima. Indeed.
Because I was gonna say, because you're seeing that even on the health system side. The health system side is looking more at social determinants of health and how do you reach certain demographics. So it's not really a big surprise to see moving more on that side into the clinical trial space, because it's an easy hand in hand there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you mentioned briefly, that we've sort of found ourselves positioned in an age of remote work. We've discussed, remote experimentation, etc. On that general theme, I was wondering if any of our panelists have some thoughts on how advanced technologies and AI in particular is changing collaboration dynamics within the pharma industry. Surely it is, but to what extent and in what ways?
I believe I can answer these like real short, real general. This is a room for collaborations in a time of contract research organizations, where we can divide our like big task in small and deliver them through the other, as I said, CROs, which can do AI as a service, like clinical trials as a service. There's also room for real world studies, as we were talking about the implementation of AI in utilization of big data sets from electronic healthcare records, from the personal assistants, the medical devices which track many of the digital biomarkers and other biomarkers. So yeah, this is the time for contract research organizations, I believe.
Fantastic. And I suppose still riffing on the theme of collaboration, during yesterday's panel, we were discussing some of the advantages and disadvantages of AI and pharma startups and scale-ups versus large pharma corporations, which have onboarded AI specialists, created divisions, etc. I'm wondering what the panel's broad thoughts are on the present and future role of big tech corporations, collaborations with folks like Google, Tencent, Microsoft, etc. Will they continue to play a role? Will we see those activities be done not through collaboration but in-house via large pharma corporations, or are we going to see an explosion of growth in startups and scale-ups themselves?
I probably take this one. So the big tech is entering the space with quite an interesting portfolio of activities, so to speak. And on the one hand, we all have been using the services from these big tech operations, and probably a lot of AI infrastructure, AI projects rely on clouds, rely on computing tools and frameworks for the model training, etc. But the companies, the big tech corporations, they kind of realize their potential in this area through the technology, and they kind of start playing the role of R&D companies as well, not only the tech providers or service providers, but also the company that can actually create own assets and own research. And so one example being the recent launch of a new company by Alphabet Incorporated. That's the Isomorphic Labs. That's the company, kind of a new entity in their portfolio, which will be focusing 100% on the AI-driven drug discovery. So they kind of see the transformation of the industry, and they want to first utilize their progress with the AlphaFold software developed by Deepmind. So they ultimately see that they can crack the biology problems efficiently. I mean, they did something that a life science company didn't do in 50 years. So that's something interesting to consider. And so they now hire talent, they hire life science professionals. They have a lot of hiring programs for, geneticists, biologists, wherever, and so they form their own capabilities. Of course, it's not going to be a pharma business completely, probably never, but they are going to take certain niches in the foreseeable future, and I believe, considering the pace of the artificial intelligence and drug discovery, that those companies will be kind of very strong competitors because they can do it at scale. They have cutting edge technology, virtually unlimited budget, a very favorable, HR processes, and I mean, it's nice to work for them. I mean, and Google launched Verily, and it's pretty strong company in medical device space and life science space and other projects. So these companies will be competing, but the true innovation, in my opinion, will be happening in this small to medium biotech space, where new startups, this kind of like we have today, the speakers are talking about AI first approach, the AI driven platforms, they will be emerging more and more, in my opinion. Who knows how the dynamics goes, because we have seen less of them actually in 2021 compared to, let's say, the last year. So for some reason, the peak of this kind of companies was somewhere in 2018. We have seen probably like several dozen companies emerged with quite strong funding, and but now those companies becoming bigger. Some of them are going on IPO, and we haven't seen this year like a lot of new companies emerging, but probably they will get on our radar next year when they have like funding raised, or when they somehow show up in the media, because obviously we don't track down all the smallest companies. We typically focus on somebody who already established certain credibility in space, or some big names are associated with the company. So certainly we will see a lot of companies next year, in my opinion.
Indeed. So it's interesting, sensible, I would say, but interesting that in terms of the longer term dynamics, you see big breakthroughs coming from small and medium sized startups and scale ups, as opposed to these large corporations, which again you feel is due to the data first mindset, psychology, etc. The fact that this is not, a sort of side division. This is in the very bones that these companies are founded upon from the get-go, right? And you also raised a fairly interesting point. I remember earlier webinars, earlier analytics discussions on how large pharma corporations are onboarding AI specialists, AI divisions, etc. But we weren't talking as much at that time of tech giants hiring, pharma, medicinal chemistry, etc., what have you, specialists. Would you say that is shifting, that's more common today than, say 5 years ago? In other words, is that an emerging trend?
Yes, I believe so, because indeed a lot of activity and a lot of resources that those companies kind of bring to the table. Of course, naturally they attract talent, and when somebody, a young PhD, ML engineer, is thinking where to go to work to Pfizer, or to go working for Google, well, it's a tough choice, to be honest. And I guess some personal preferences might come into play, but I mean, that's obviously a more dynamic, more complex competition for talent that is going to be unveiling in the foreseeable couple of years. And I believe it's going, but again, on the other hand, we have a lot of new talent emerging. I mean, now university, I have seen programs in Stanford, in Harvard, launching programs specifically for AI in healthcare, let's say. So we will kind of see the expanding market of the highly skilled young specialists coming. So I mean, that's the dynamics of this area. It's getting complex.
Well, I think I'll round down our panel discussion with one or two more general questions. The promise, potential, accelerative impact, disruptive impact, etc., of AI for pharma broadly, for drug discovery in particular, is fairly evident, fairly obvious, etc. But it's less often that we talk about limitations or challenges. I'm wondering if our panelists have any specific comments on specific limitations that they've encountered in applying AI for what they're trying to do, either generally in terms of industry trends or personally in terms of what their specific companies are doing.
Yeah, maybe it might be a different problem, but I think one of the limitation or obstacles would be communication. So because we need diverse expertise to be mixed properly to establish a good AI system that sticks to the real problem and provides realistic solutions which can be used in the real world. So yeah, I don't know how many times I spoke the word real, but we definitely need brilliant ideas from AI scientists regarding if we have to solve this type of problem, and there are some options because this approach is like this and that approach is like that, and also we have to incorporate the domain knowledge, not by just explaining superficially. I mean, we have to solve this problem and we can use this data. So that this is not the end, I think. And as a systems biologist, actually, I'm a systems biologist by training, and I always have been trying to help the AI scientists in my team to understand the nature of the specific type of data and also the biological context, and so that they can fully understand the situation to think of the most suitable solution. And I'm not sure I did well in understanding their field, but also I'm trying to do that, and they also help me understand their field by repeatedly answering my questions, because I sometimes ask them so many questions, the same question so many times to fully understand it. So I think it would be great if we learn from each other to communicate more efficiently. So I'm not sure whether it is the situation that the industry can solve, but obviously we have to be aware of that and not just putting it aside.
Indeed, yeah, it's important to remember that AI is a huge disruptor, accelerator, but there's always a need for the human element and things inherent in that, like communication, etc.
I mean, Shane, I would add another bottleneck, if you let me. That not every problem needs to be solved with AI, actually. I mean, speaking philosophically, the unit economics of AI is worse than, let's say, the unit economics of software, more regular software. And deploying AI systems is a complex business from the technological point of view, from management point of view, and from many aspects. And so some companies who just apply, some analytical tools, like we have been using cheminformatics tools for years and even decades with great success. So companies who do not try to build complete process, they are okay with using simpler tools like regular machine learning frameworks, Python library, which can solve some very specific task. That's, I mean, do you call it AI or not? Probably not. It's just probably a tool. But what we call AI, the Pharma Intelligence, is of course this kind of stuff, like, for example, Stendigma's doing, that they building the whole, frame, the whole system, concerted, collection of models which are working together, creating a workflow for the drug discovery. That's AI. That's the kind of brain that has been built in the laboratory, and not just a simple tool, a small tool to do some mining or chatbot or whatever. That's not AI in our marketing sense, so to speak.
Right. And
I'd
Shane,
also like to add, if you let me to, some challenges of AI in healthcare in terms of data itself, because speaking of myself, a more technical person, I could outline some. First of all, this is like a simple lack of data, because we don't have much data for different age group, genders, and other communities. This results in some problems, like these patient data is difficult just to access from hospitals and protected EHR systems. These data is unstructured, and this is the one of the cornerstones for meeting the learning itself, for machine learning, for deep learning, and the insufficient patient history when the EHRs are mostly new tool for hospitals. So this is a kind of a problem too. Another kind of a bottleneck for data in AI, this is in capability, because some AI systems, they work perfectly only in lab conditions, but they are completely useless while they're in a clinical use, because there were some small factors that weren't accounted for during the algorithm development, and this can be everything from the power of the sound to the lighting inside the room, which can significantly influence in results of algorithms that based on the sound and images, for example. Another part of these challenges is lack of high quality reporting, because AI, this is the really general spectrum of different technologies inside, and many studies, they are published with a huge speed. This is a result that they are printed on the servers that are not submitted or peer-reviewed by journals, and after that we see that many machine learning studies, they just lack high quality reporting, which helps to understand the risks and the biases. And I believe the last bottleneck of the data in AI, this is simple generalization, of course, because this results in poor performance, and this challenge of generalization in healthcare lies in technical differences between the mechanical and medical equipment they use, and the coding definitions and variations of local clinical and administrative practices.
okay, yeah, well said. We often hear about the explosive volume of data that's out there, and that being the central reason that AI is becoming not complementary, but fundamentally necessary for the future of the industry. So it's sometimes important to zero in and remember the bottlenecks and the challenges that are present and need to be overcome on the data side, as opposed to the AI side per se.
We have we have a number of questions from the readers. Do you want to read them, Franco, or I can read it?
Sure. Yeah, one that I was going to bring up. So Ali Ahmadi asks what the main challenges are which prevent large companies from fully embracing advanced technologies, at least now. I think that Andre, you've made some points already that speak to this. Scale-ups and startups are data first. It's in their very bones, etc. It's not something that they have to adapt existing bureaucracies and infrastructures and agendas in order to encompass etc. But do you have any complementary points to add?
It's easy to understand why big, like not just big tech, but any large corporation has hurdles with adopting any new technologies. Just try to partner with them or just try to have them as clients. When you compare working with a startup, let's say, where things just, very flexible, dynamical, you can have projects run and, up to the point of the implementation in weeks or months. In the large corporation might take half a year, and it's not because of technical burden, it's because of, bureaucracy, different, very diverse set of requirements for, filling the paperwork, contacting guys across the whole globe. That's the organizational, I would say, rigidness. They're very rigid, and they're not flexible, and this is the main point of adopting. Of course, some of the organization they kind of solve it, but I guess pharmaceutical area industry has something to learn from big tech companies like Google, for example, because those have quite a culture of innovation in there, and they have some, very kind of flexible mode of entrepreneurship inside the companies, and this is something that can be, benchmarked and learned probably. Other than that,
Indeed, yeah. The point about the specific corporate culture of a given corporation is indeed important and very easily overlooked. It's easy to throw all of them into the same, bureaucratically limited basket, as it were. But there are, in fact, differences among them. Another question that we got, which might be of interest to our panelists, comes from Jai Kang, who asks, given that it typically takes 10 plus years to develop a drug, with the AI and digital infrastructure that we have today, how many years do you think that we've reduced the time span in practice? Again, from end-to-end development of a drug. Have we? Or are we seeing, and if not, will we be seeing this in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years?
That's a good question. Maybe our colleagues also will contribute, but my opinion here is that, of course, AI is very good for early drug design and preclinical. All these companies that reported major time reduction for the preclinical, like having the new target and new drug ready for IND filing, like within 18 months or something like that, this is a huge reduction in time, because a typical project might take like 5 years or something like that. But on the other hand, you cannot, you still need to do experimentation, you still need to do that lab, and at the end of the day, you still need to dose patients to see what the result is going to be. And so, in my opinion, no matter how cool AI is going to be in pharma, still we will have certain time. It's not going to be like a major reduction down to several months for the drug to emerge. I guess it's not feasible, but at least a reduction even by half is a huge reduction in the overall time. Like 10 years and 5 years, this is a huge difference. And if we can get to that point, that could be really a game changer already.
Yes, yeah, it certainly make a big difference for the patients. Yeah, indeed.
But
Hee-jung?
I actually like to hear from Hee-jung, because that's precisely the
Right.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking of answering the question. So, yeah, actually, currently we are trying to shorten the time period for finding lead compounds, because we're contributing the early drug discovery stages. So, actually, yeah, we're not concentrating on the clinical trials part, so I cannot say exactly, but we're now finding the lead compound to less than a year. That is our goal, and we already running our pipeline starting from the early this year, and we're doing lead optimization now, so it's apparently less than a year. And not only shorten the time span, and we also try to secure a really smart pool of the candidates. So outside of the shorten the time span, I think it would the securing the smart pool of target the compounds, it would affect the final success rate, so which will be also beneficial to the whole drug discovery process. So yes, we have to also think about the final success rate. So if it takes the same time, but if the success rate is much higher, then it's also meaningful and significant improvement. So yeah, we are also trying to concentrate on that point. And for the clinical trials, maybe, and I just know that there are many companies to contribute to the patient stratification, as already mentioned. So yeah, if we can deeply engage with the right target patient, then it could be a big improvement in clinical trial, that kind of part.
Yeah, well, thank you, Hee-jung. It's an important point to make. Like almost everything, this is a multivariate problem. It's not just about time. It's about validity, shall we say, and how effective these things are, and the success rate at the end of the day. Yeah, it's if I were tasked with making a bet on what stage of the process AI has the greatest potential of accelerating, it would certainly be the earlier stages. And I think that's fairly clear and fairly recognized among industry stakeholders, but it's a bit of a more open question with regards to actual trials. Shane, do you see AI accelerating the pace of clinical trials, or do you see it just allowing us to do it in a little bit of a more intelligent manner?
Obviously, for us, I can speak specifically on the respiratory trials, but it's a little bit of both, right? So, can it increase efficiency? Absolutely, because it's all based around the data endpoints and what, for us specifically, what type of respiratory biomarker are they wanting to collect in a continuous manner versus, like I mentioned, I was kind of using the example of movie trailers versus the whole entire movie, because you're getting little clips. So to get all of these little clips with every single participant, to collect enough data to actually make a positive outcome can take time. And so cost and time, like I mentioned, of the two biggest factors that are with respiratory trials in general. We have to figure out a way to, we don't have to figure out a way to speed that up, but I would assume most organizations would like to find some way to save costs and save money. And utilizing AI or machine learning, whichever you would like to use, to do those, to create those efficiencies and identify for us specifically. I mentioned those, and kind of like how I mentioned in one of our specific trials, is you see a lot of cost endpoints in clinical trials, but there's more usually to it than just cost. But there's nothing really out there before Stratos to capture any other data except for cough. So to understand what that patient's chest excursion looked like, is it a dry cough? Is it a productive cough? Is it a wet cough? All of those different little biomarkers can have an impact, but without capturing that data at a longitudinal standpoint, it's really going to be difficult to create efficiencies in that post-analysis, and actually in getting that data back to the sponsor in a meaningful time frame, to where they could make adjustments between phase 2 and phase 3. So it's a little bit of both on that side. But specifically, I can really talk to respiratory trials. I really can't talk to other trials outside of respiratory with Stratos.
Well, I mean, a lot of the points that you made seem very applicable as general principles, right, as far as stratification and data go. So thank you, Shane.